there were 42,500 concentration camps during the Holocaust. Yes, you heard that right. 42,500 concentration camps during the Holocaust. And the survivors had a common theme. If you survive, tell the world about this place. By 1847, German professionals and academicians had sought to exclude Jews from public life and the professions. This is way before the Holocaust, almost 100 years before the Holocaust. In 1920, a 25-point program was proposed to ban Jews as German citizens. 1920. The Holocaust didn't officially start until 1933. In 1924, the Nazis proposed a bill to exclude Jews from public office. Then the next year, the Nazis proposed a bill to dismiss Jews from the civil service. By 1930, property confiscation of Jews was proposed. What does this show us? That before the Holocaust, even almost 100 years before the Holocaust, the ground, the atmosphere was fertile for the Holocaust and full of Jew hatred. In Germany, the Jews were first annihilated economically, professionally, and socially through thousands of incremental laws and orders. The next step, the Jews were annihilated physically from the face of the earth. Their property was confiscated, their children taken, their bodies starved, beaten, burned. This is an actual photo of Dr. Mike Siegel, who was an eminent 50-year-old German Jewish lawyer. If you look at his body, it is bruised. He is barefoot, his trousers are ripped, and he is being marched by the Nazi brown shirts through the streets of Germany with a sign hanging from his neck. I am a Jew, but I will never again complain to the police. So humiliation was very, very much a part of Nazi Germany. This was actually taken March 10th, 1933. Again, 42,500 concentration camps and ghettos everywhere throughout Europe, from France to Russia, with 15 to 20 million people who died or were imprisoned and enslaved. But the concentration camps were not just in Europe. They were also in North Africa and in Asia. In North Africa, there were 17 slave labor camps. 3 in Morocco, 3 in Algeria, 7 in Tunisia, and 4 in Libya. So the maps and lists that you see that only have a limited number of concentration camps on them, cannot possibly show 42,500. As early as 1933, Hitler had established 110 camps to imprison enemies of the Jewish state, which ultimately expanded to 30,000 slave labor camps, over 1,100 Jewish ghettos, 980 concentration camps. A 1,000 prisoner of war camps, and thousands of other camps and sub-camps used to euthanize the elderly and infirm. There were also 3,000 camps and Jew houses in Berlin alone. In one city, 3,000 camps and Jew houses. Researchers have said, quote, "You literally could not go anywhere in Germany without running into forced labor camps, prisoner of war camps, concentration camps. They were everywhere." So when people say that they did not know about the camps and what was happening to the Jews, it is false. It is very, very false. This is just a list of some of the countries where the camps were located. The types of camps included early camps that sprang up in Germany after Hitler became chancellor in January 1933, rising like mushrooms after the rain. State camps, Dachau, where my father was. That was his last camp. He was in many camps. Dachau was a state camp. There were hostage camps, known also as police prison camps. And there were labor camps. My father, my grandparents, my aunt, and many of our relatives were all in labor camps, or ghettos where the labor was horrific. There were prisoner of war camps, rehabilitation and re-education of Poles camps. Actually, rehabilitation is a lie. People were not rehabilitated in concentration camps. There were transit camps where inmates were put, slaves, Jewish slaves, were collected and held until they were transported to other camps. And there were camps that were specifically designated as death camps located in Poland, where the norm was as soon as you arrived, you were dead within a half hour or so. Those main camps were Treblinka, Sobibor, Belzec, and Chamno. Now, all of the camps had some elements of death camps because in all of the camps, people did die. They were killed and or they were worked to death or starved to death. In some of the camps, there were gas chambers, as pictured here. The Jews became suspicious when they were already in the gas chambers. This is an exact quote from a person who administered the gas chambers. At this point in time, there was no turning back. The chambers were densely packed, the doors were sealed airtight, and immediately the gassing procedure commenced. After 20 to 30 minutes, there was complete silence. The people were gassed and dead. Later, cremated. This particular gas chamber would have held bodies crammed together so that no one could possibly move. And the walls have scratch marks all over them. The gas itself, Zyklon B, was sent through holes in the ceilings. Zyklon B came in canisters like this, manufactured by Bayer, B-A-Y-R, Bayer, the same manufacturer that produces Roundup today, the same manufacturer that produces some of the women's contraceptives, children's aspirins, etc. And the same manufacturer that was the first to produce heroin. Bayer, B-A-Y-E-R, produced heroin in the beginning as a children's cough medicine. In Sobibor death camp, where my family, part of my family, was murdered, Zyklon B poisoned hundreds of thousands just in 1 year, from 1942 until 1943. Inside of sealed gas chambers, where the victims were exposed to hydrogen cyanide, which is a battlefield poison agent or a pesticide. To this day, Bayer is the largest pesticide manufacturer in the world. And again, their product that gets the most attention is Roundup, through which people have been determined to develop cancer. These little pellets here are actually the Zyklon B, which aerosolize into the poison gas. Now, for every camp, every concentration camp, there might be other sub-camps. Gross-Rosen had 100 sub-camps. Auschwitz had 44. Stutoff had 40 sub-camps. My father was in Stutoff. He was a Nazi slave, a slave of the Nazis for 7 years. From November 9th, 1938, which is known as Kristallnacht, until May 1st, 1945. The prisoners in these subcamps died from exhaustion, overexposure to the cold, starvation, diseases that were untreated, and executions by the tens of thousands. And of course, the gas chambers. Now, overexposure to the cold. My father and my grandparents, Louise and Berta Katz, K-A-T-Z, were working outside in the Riga, Latvia ghetto in temperatures of 52 below 0 Fahrenheit. 52 below 0 Fahrenheit, which is unbearably frigid. Even if you're properly dressed, which they were not given proper clothing by the Nazis, and even if you're properly fed, which they were starved by the Nazis. This is just a list of some of the subcamps, or of the camps that had subcamps. According to a colonel in the United States Army describing Dachau, which again was my father's final concentration camp, there are troops found sights, sounds, and stenches, horrible beyond belief, cruelty so enormous as to be incomprehensible to the normal mind. My father, when he came to this country, looked like these men. He was 120 pounds. He was a walking skeleton. But thank God he was walking and he was in this country. This was one of my dad's camps, Stutoff in Poland, which was established in 1939 and was not liberated until May 10th, 1945. There were different liberation dates of the camps. This particular camp was liberated after my father had already been liberated. It is estimated, and there's no way to know for sure, that there were over 85,000 victims at Stutoff, and there were 40 subcamps. The first concentration camp created by the Nazis outside the country of Germany. Here we see a soap factory at Stutoff. Hundreds of inmates were executed for the production of soap. They made soap. The Nazis made soap out of human bodies. Incrementalism in the Holocaust means that step by step, little by little, the Holocaust became enormous. How did this happen? Infanticide, asset seizure, hate speech, desensitization, occultism, demonization, normalization of violence, killing of babies. Here we see an actual picture of Holocaust babies. When the commandant of this camp was asked if he ever thought of his own children when he saw the Holocaust babies and children, no, it was always a huge mass, packed together, running, being driven with whips. This was the system. It worked. So all these beautiful, beautiful, beautiful babies and children were seen by the people in charge of the camps as a huge mass, packed together, running and being driven with whips. There were babies born in the Holocaust. Who knows that I was born or what I looked like? Did I look like this baby? I am Bianca Louise Leishauer. Well, it turns out that this is really not a picture of Bianca Louise Leishauer because There is no picture of her. She is listed as number 308 on this actual transport list going into Sobibor. Bianca Louise Leishauer was born in Westerbork in Holland, a concentration camp. And at 1 month old, she was transported to Sobibor death camp. A minimum of 250,000 prisoners died at Sobibor by gassing, extreme labor, starvation, overexposure, exhaustion, disease, and executions. And here she is. That is the only proof on earth that Bianca Louise Leishauer, my cousin, ever existed. She was born on April 27th, 1943. And she was murdered, gassed to death with her parents on May 28th, 1943, 1 month old. This shows the trip that Bianca Louise took from Holland all across Europe to Sobibor death camp. Surrounding Sobibor were railroad tracks and minefields. If you tried to escape, you'd be blown up by the minefields, filled with explosives to kill or maim anyone. Layers of barbed wire were inside of the minefields and surrounded the watchtowers. This was the train station at Sobibor, where my cousin, my aunt, my uncle would have been brought and then straight to the gas chambers to die within a half hour. The people were packed into the cattle cars to be transported there. On the selection ramp of some of the concentration camps, a guard, a Nazi officer, standing at the top, would wave his finger left, death, right, life. So if you were told to go to the left, you were dead. You were going straight to your death. If you were told to go to the right, you would be worked to death. My father, Al Katz, my aunt, Ruth, and my uncle, Erwin, survived the Holocaust. Of the 34,313 Jews deported from Westerbork to Sobibor between March and July 1943, only 5 months, 18 Jews survived. 18 out of 34,313. And you have to ask, how were babies possibly born in the concentration camps? There were vicious dogs. There were violent officers who would beat and kick and shoot anyone they felt like whenever they felt like it. 6 pregnant Jewish women gave birth to 6 Jewish babies miraculously in the subcamp of Dachau called Kaufering 1, even though 2 SS guards had appeared at their factory one day with snarling German shepherds demanding all of the pregnant women to identify themselves. And one of the babies that was born, as you see in this picture, said that her mother told her, "Well, I wanted to have you, so I did everything I could to stay alive. You saved me and I saved you." These mothers wanted their babies enough to do anything they could to bear the babies and to raise them. A grown Holocaust baby spoke of her mother. It took her a long time to see a policeman with a gun and not expect it to be pointed at her. She always feared it would all happen again. And that is very common of the survivors. These were just young, beautiful children who many lived their entire young childhoods in concentration camps, behind barbed wire, wearing filthy clothes, and starving. The whole concept of the Holocaust was based upon eugenics, that some people should not be able to have children. It's a worldview of persons being unfit to be born or to live. And Hitler thought that the Jews were unfit to be born and to live. Indiana, a state in the Midwest of the United States, right under Lake Michigan, and right above Kentucky, and next to Ohio and Illinois. Indiana was the first place in the entire world, to have a law that made eugenics legal, forced sterilizations of people that were thought to be criminal or have mental problems or paupers. That means they were poor. And these traits they believed would be hereditary. I had a little uncle who was murdered in the liquidation of the Riga, Latvia ghetto on November 3rd, 1943, along with both of my grandparents. This is Arthur Werner Katz. This is the only picture of Arthur Werner Katz. He loved his older brother, who was my father, Al Katz, so much so that he would stand with his hand through the barbed wire fence as my father, his older brother, would march past through the ghetto as a slave, and Arthur Werner, who was 9 years old, would give my father his precious food ration. When Arthur Werner himself was starving, freezing, and risking being shot for giving away his food ration. This was my father's family before the Holocaust began. My father's the little boy in the front row, looking very mischievous. And you don't see Arthur Werner in this picture because he wasn't born yet. So it was a family with 5 children. What happened to the women and girls in the Holocaust? You can see them in the snow, pulling a train car of quarried stones, weighing thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds. During the Holocaust, even the babies had to wear Jewish stars. That's called the Star of David, for King David. And that was the way that the Nazis humiliated and identified the Jews so that they could be easily persecuted or murdered. They had to wear the stars everywhere that they went, even the babies. The people were starving. They were starving in the ghettos, in the Warsaw Ghetto. There were children all over the streets, starving and dying. And not just in the Warsaw Ghetto, but in the other ghettos. They were freezing, afraid. Many of the children were raising themselves and raising their siblings because their parents had been murdered. In the camps, there was barbed wire everywhere. Desolation and despair everywhere. You can see the little girl on the left is showing her tattoo. In some of the camps, everyone, all the Jews, were tattooed with numbers. You didn't have a name. You had a number. And that number matched exactly with a computer card, because computers used to have cards, punch cards. And that punch card would match up with your gender and your age and other distinguishing characteristics. The watchtowers at the camps were infamous for the guards just mowing down with guns, machine guns, any Jew that they felt like. You didn't even have to do anything quote unquote wrong. You were a Jew, and that was what was wrong. So here we have the watchtowers, we have the electrified fencing, electrified barbed wire fencing, layers of that, and the minefields and the dogs. The gas chambers, and then the crematoria. Crematoria, burning the bodies. The Jews in the Holocaust had no funerals, had no burials, had no gravestones. Many were burned. And the ashes are unidentifiable. Once the body's burned, it is absolutely unidentifiable as even a human being. In countries throughout Europe, Africa, and Asia. There were 6 million Jews who perished. 6 million Jews who perished. A very few actually escaped from places like death camps like Sobibor. These are actual Holocaust survivors who escaped from Sobibor. Now, after the Jews were liberated, what happened to them? In his official report to the president, Harry Truman, who had just become president in April 1945, Earl Harrison had inspected 30 Jewish displaced persons camps, and he stated in his official report, 3 months after Victory in Europe Day, and even longer after liberation of individual groups, many Jewish displaced persons, this is after the Holocaust supposedly is over, are living under guard behind barbed wire fences in camps of several descriptions, including some of the most notorious of the concentration camps. As matters now stand, we appear to be treating the Jews as the Nazis treated them. Expect that we do not exterminate them. In other words, after the Holocaust was over, millions of Jews had no safe place to go. They could not return home because their homes were taken by people who lived next door or down the street, or who just decided to steal a home. And when the Jews came to stay in their own homes, much of the time they were persecuted or murdered. So where did they stay? Behind barbed wire in displaced persons camps. This man was in a displaced persons camp behind barbed wire, which was really a concentration camp, for years after the Holocaust, because he had nowhere to go. And millions had nowhere to go, no safe place to go. So the Jews had worked for many scores of years, since the 1800s, to establish a Jewish homeland, which is now called the State of Israel. This says liberated Jewish children on their way to Palestine. That's what the State of Israel was called before it became a state. President Harry Truman said, "No claim is more meritorious as that of the Jews who for so many years have known persecution and enslavement." President Harry Truman immediately recognized the State of Israel on May 14th, 1948, and their flag was the Star of David on a blue and white background.